Hey everyone, it's Mark from Flight Sim School. We are quickly coming up on the 4-year anniversary of the release of Flight Sim, and with 2024 just around the corner, I thought it might be a good time to do a bit of a retrospective on Flight Sim 2020, how it evolved since launch, and look at the incredible growth that flight simulation in general has had in the last few years because of it. Let's start by rewinding back to mid-2020, where everyone was still stuck at home, travel hadn't even remotely started to recover yet, and then Microsoft, who had partnered with Asobo, released a new version of Flight Sim with a world that looked better than anyone had ever seen in a desktop flight sim before. It obviously also got a lot of attention, not just from the flight sim community, but from the gaming world in general, mostly because of how it was recreating the entire planet from satellite data, allowing us to fly anywhere that we wanted with elevation data that mostly made sense, and auto-generated scenery that was much closer to their real-world counterparts. Now, of course, if you looked a little bit closer, you would start to see the slightly post-apocalypticness of the big cities, but regardless of that, what was done here was groundbreaking technology-wise, especially at this scale, and I feel like we sort of take it for granted these days. Not everything was perfect though. There were a lot of people who had trouble with crashes to desktop, low FPS, terrain, and object level of detail issues where things would just pop in out of nowhere. And even the live weather wasn't fantastic and it would use a lot of resources too. On top of that, even though it shipped with the community folder, allowing you to load extensions built by third parties, this was often the cause of a lot of issues, and we often had to go through a process of elimination to figure out which extension was giving us trouble. To Microsoft and Asobo's credit though, they were very proactive with sim updates to address issues as they cropped up, and by around Sim Update 5 is where we really started having a solid product that you could fly with little to no issues, even with extensions installed. Don't get me wrong, things are still far from perfect in 2020. There are a lot of people still having to do full reinstalls due to persistent crashes to desktop. Xbox performance still seems to be an issue for some, and even updates can sometimes cause you to lose all of your settings and even bindings, which, having experienced this one myself, is pretty frustrating. That being said, something with such a large scope as Flight Sim is bound to have bugs that aren't all ironed out yet, and just based on what I've seen in the different Flight Sim communities that I'm a part of, I do feel like we've reached a point where it's stable enough for the majority of users. Mixed in with all of that was the launch of Flight Sim on Xbox, which allowed it to reach a market that had never been tapped before. And of course, it made some of us wonder if Flight Sim will become more of a game rather than a simulator as it's traditionally been. Although there was definitely an element of gamification with some of the add-ons that came out afterwards, like the Reno Air Races, the Top Gun, and the Dune extensions, it also allowed a large group of people to discover flight simulation for the first time, even if they couldn't afford a high-end spec PC. I saw this effect myself. Some of my closest friends who'd always looked at me a little bit strangely for liking Flight Sim in the past even tried it, which they would have never done had it been only on PC. And even though most of them didn't continue with it, I have met a bunch of new simmers who became hooked because of its easy access on Xbox. I know a lot of people feel like having it on Xbox waters down the product to the masses, but I look at it more as a way of opening up new possibilities, because more users means more developers are going to create add-ons for it, and more hardware manufacturers are going to invest more in new devices. At launch, the aircraft that came with Flight Sim were, let's say, average at best, especially if you started to dig into the system's depth of the more complex planes, with lots of features not simulated in the cockpit, and even the avionics in the smaller GA planes were a very bizarro version of the real Garmin units. That's where the incredible community around Flight Sim started to get involved though, and we saw the working title developers create and release updated versions of the G1000, which brought it much closer in line with reality, and add-on developers got involved as well to improve the system's depth of even simple planes like the C-152 to 172, and also airliners like the fly-by-wire A320 and a ton more as well. Microsoft also partnered with INI Builds, first to bring us the A310 and more recently the A320 V2 totally free of charge, and although they aren't perfect, for free additions to the sim they brought a lot of value and they raised the bar of the default planes by a fair bit. They also brought the working title team in-house to help redevelop all of the avionics in the sim from the G1000 through to the G3X, on top of updating the 747 and some of the premium deluxe planes like the Longitude and the 787, which made them feel a lot more worth the price that we paid for them. More than anything else, what this showed me is that they're committed to improving the product, not just from a bells and whistles point of view, but also to give us decent planes from the get-go. And we can see that's continuing into 2024 with some of the announcements that they've made, like including the FlightFX Vision Jet as part of the base install, as well as other partnerships that they've made with Gotfriends and INI Builds to bring the default planes to a higher level. Some add-ons though, like the A2A Comanche and the Phoenix A320, took the word simulation to the next level, and they gave us experiences that are really without comparison in flight sim, and they raised the bar for everyone else as to what a payware quality plane should be. Of course, a lot of developers also saw the opportunity to make a quick buck, and the built-in marketplace very quickly got polluted with a ton of low to mid quality content, and because of the sheer volume of add-ons being created, anything coming through the marketplace takes forever to receive updates now. The original goal of the marketplace was to allow users to get add-ons without having to go to a third party to get them, and for beginners who aren't super comfortable with downloading and installing things themselves, that can make a lot of sense, but in practice, the way it works right now has driven a lot of us away from purchasing from it. What doesn't help on top of that is that the marketplace add-ons will often be locked down so you can't tweak or extend them. For example, in the case of a scenery, you won't have access to any of the tools the developer might have in place to tweak it to your needs, which is a big deal when you're trying to eke out as much performance as you can out of an older machine. I'm not sure if anything needs to be done there, but if they want to get back to that original goal for the marketplace, there's definitely some reflecting and thought that needs to go into it for 2024, because I don't see the trend reversing itself. Flight Sim 2020 generates its world either from satellite data only, if that's all that's available, or photogrammetry, and in those early days you could run into some weird artifacts where the data was off, like that 200-story high building just outside of Melbourne. But what the world and city updates brought us were improvements to both the satellite and the photogrammetry areas, on top of including some handcrafted points of interest in airports as well. Photogrammetry is a process where you take images to generate 3D models. So rather than having a developer accurately model each individual building, instead you just use hundreds, if not thousands of images to generate a model that looks like the real thing. Big cities around the world slowly all went through this process of getting better photogrammetry, where they acquired more data to be able to build better models for them. And today, if you have a decent machine, you can get some pretty darn good looking scenery in most major cities. On top of that, with the rise of AI and ML over the last few years, they've embraced it to improve the scenery even away from the major centers, with some pretty incredible improvements coming in 2024, making Flight Sim the go-to choice for VFR flying since it looks so close to the real world. Flight Sim has evolved a lot in the 4 years that we've been flying it, from the world to the aircraft and the community that surrounds it, and for all of those reasons, I'm really looking forward to seeing where it goes next. If you enjoyed this look back at Flight Sim 2020, make sure that you like the video and let me know in the comments what you're most looking forward to in 2024, and I'll see you in the next one.